During the war, I had no idea where the rest of my relatives were. Terezin was really a ghetto rather than a concentration camp. It's an old fortress that was built 200 years earlier. First, it housed political prisoners, communists, socialists, but starting in 1942, there were trains from Prague to Terezin. My grandmother, Sophie Stein, was sent to Terezin in 1942. She was a type 1 diabetic. The Germans took all medication away from people who were sent to Terezin, and she died in 19 days because of a complete lack of insulin and anything else. One of the interesting things about Terezin is that in 1944, the Swedish Red Cross visited because Hitler was still concerned about the public relations, that the Germans took care of their Jews. In point of fact, the Nazis made a film, Hitler gives a town to the Jews, and that was Terezin. It's strictly propaganda. The Germans stage a soccer match between the German guards and the Czech inmates. They open a pastry shop, they open a cafe, there's music. So it looks like life isn't so bad for the Jews. Look they got food, they're well dressed, and so on. Apparently the members of the Red Cross bought the line, they thought everything was okay, and a day or two later, pretty much every Jew who was involved in the making of that film was on the way to Auschwitz. The euphemism was going trains east, and trains going east meant trains going to Auschwitz primarily. My father had a brother, Richard, my favorite uncle, and Richard would bring me toys and really spoiled me. He is arrested, and he and his wife are sent to Terezin, and from Terezin to Auschwitz, as are my father's two sisters, their husbands, and their children. In a span of about 4 or 5 months, my father's entire family was wiped out. By the end of the war, fewer than 5% of Czech Jews who were sent from Terezin to Auschwitz survived. My dad went to Terezin later than the rest of his family because his wife was Catholic. And so the Jews in mixed marriages went later. Terezin was still difficult. Increasingly, there were food shortages, there were terrible housing conditions, there was terrible overcrowding, and something like 30 or 40,000 people died in Terezin itself of malnutrition and other reasons, but my dad managed to survive. I did not know where my father was during the war. He was a bit of a shadowy figure. He was doing manual labor. Periodically, he would come back, but my mother never told me that he was sent to Terezin. And when I asked her, she would say he's on a business trip. My father was a businessman, and he would take trips periodically before the war, and she was trying to protect me. She also made it very clear to me never to tell the other kids in school that my father was Jewish. And on one occasion, one of the bullies in the class, a fellow named Josef, sort of burly, built like a bully, started saying, "Your father's a Jew, your father's a Jew." And I said, "No, he's not." We got into a fight. Teacher broke it up. I got a bloody nose. But when I got home and told my mother, she says, "Never do that. You could get yourself into danger. Don't do that." So there was the secrecy, and the less said, the better. My elementary school was in Prague itself, so I would take a tram from an area called Braník to Prague. One of the stories that I recall is getting on the tram, and it was relatively empty when I got on. I sat down, and like a good second grader, I was reading a book. And I was really involved in the book, and suddenly I see a German soldier in front of me. and I see boots, and I see a green, dark green uniform, and I look up, and on his cap is a skull with crossed bones. That is a member of the SS. And I really got very nervous, and he says to me in German, "Get up and give me your place." So I quickly put my books together and went as far away from him as possible, shaking for the rest of the ride, got to school, and the teacher obviously saw that I was upset, and she calmed me down. And I thought that he would maybe follow me, or he knew where my father was, and that maybe somehow what I did would get him into trouble. I mean, I really, panicked, and the teacher calmed me down, but it was quite a terrifying moment.